Chapter 17 of Frigid Fracas by Maxine Reynolds. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. It was a free evening for Joe, but one that Nadine had found necessary to devote to her medical duties. Max had been gushing about a cabaret in Buda, a place named Bexakapu, where the wine flowed as wine can flow only in the Balkans, and where the gypsy music was as only gypsy music can be. Max had developed a tolerance for wine after only 2 or 3 attempts at what they called sat, and which he didn't consider exactly beer. Joe said, only half interested, "For proletarians, party members, or what?" Max said, "Well, gee, I guess it's most proletarians, but in these little places you can see almost anybody. A couple of nights ago, when I took off, I even seen a Rusky field marshal there, and he was drenched." Joe was at loose ends. Besides, this was a facet of Budapest life he had yet to investigate: the intimate night spots, frequented by all strata of Sov society. He came to a quick decision. "Okay, Max, let's give it a look. Possibly it'll turn out to be a place I can take Nadine. She's a bit weary of the overgrown glamour spots they have here. They're more ostentatious than anything you find even in Greater Washington." Max said, in his feisty belligerence, "Does that mean better?" Joe grunted amusement at the little man, even as he took up his jacket. "No, it doesn't," he said, "and take that chip off your shoulder. When you were back home, you were continually beefing about what a rugged go you had being a mid-lower in the West world. Now that you're over here, the merest suggestion that it's not all peaches at home, and you're ready to fight." Max said, his ugly face twisted in a grimace, even as he helped Joe with the jacket, "Well, all these characters over here are up to their tonsils in curd about the West. They think everybody's starving over there because they're unemployed, and they think the lowers are, ground down and all, and that there's lots of race troubles and all." Even as they left the apartment, Joe was realizing how much closer Max had already got to the actual people than either he or Nadine, but he was still amused. He said, "And wasn't that largely what you used to think about things over here when you were back home? How many starving have you seen?" Max grunted. "Well, that's right. They're not as bad off as I thought. Some of those telly shows I used to watch was kind of exaggerated like." Joe said absently, if international fracases could be won by newspapers and telly reporters, the Sovs would have lost the Frigid Fracas as far back as when they still called it the Cold War. The Bexakapu turned out to be largely what Max had reported and Joe expected: a rather small cellar cabaret, specializing in Hungarian wines and such nibbling delicacies as turos, suksa, and cheese gnocchis, but specializing as well, or even more so, in romantic atmosphere dominated by heartstring touching of gypsy violins, as musicians strolled by quietly, pausing at this table and then that, to lean so close to the feminine ear that the lady was all but caressed. It came to Joe that there was more of this in Sov world than at home. The Sov proletarians evidently spent less time at their telly sets than did the lowers in the West world. They found a table, crowded though the night spot was, and ordered a bottle of chilled Fetatiesca. It wasn't until the waiter had recorded the order against Joe's international credit card information that it was realized he and Max were from the West. So many non-Hungarians from all over the Sov world were about Budapest that the foreigner was an accepted large percentage of the man in the street. Max said, making as usual no attempt to lower his voice, "Well, look there. There's a sample of them not being as advanced as the West world. A waiter. Imagine using waiters for a beer joint. How come they don't have auto bars and all?" Sure, Joe said dryly. "And canned music, and a big telly screen instead of a live show. Maybe they prefer it this way, Max. You can't possibly carry automation too far. Nah, Max protested, taking a full half glass of his wine down in one gulp. Don't you see how this takes up people's time? All these waiters and musicians and all could be home relaxing like. And watching telly and sucking down tranks, Joe said, not really interested and largely arguing for the sake of conversation. A voice from the next table said coldly in accented Anglo-American, "You don't seem to appreciate our entertainment, gentlemen of the West." Joe looked at the source of the words. There were only 3 officers, only one in the distinctive pinched waist uniform of the Hungarians, a captain. The other 2 wore the Sov epaulets, which proclaimed them majors, but Joe didn't place the nationality of the uniforms. There were several bottles upon the table, largely empty. Joe said carefully, "To the contrary, we find it most enjoyable, sir." But Max had had 2 full glasses of the potent Fetiesca, and besides was feeling pleased and effervescent over his success in getting Joe Mauser, his idol, to spend a night on the town with him. He wanted to impress his superior with the extent to which he had got to know Budapest. Max said now, "We've got places just as good as this in the West, and bigger too. Lots bigger. This joint wouldn't hold more than 50 people." The one who had spoken, one of the majors who wore the boots of a cavalryman, said nastily, "Indeed. I recognize how that when I addressed you both as gentlemen, I failed to realize that in the West gentlemen are not selective in their company, and allow themselves to wallow in the gutter with the dregs of their society." The Hungarian captain said lazily, "Are you sure, Frol, that either of them are gentlemen? There seems to be a distinctive odor about the lower classes, whether in the West world or our own." Joe came to his feet quietly. Max said, suddenly sobered, "Hey, Major, sir, easy. It ain't important." Joe had picked up his glass of wine. With a gesture so easy as almost to be slow motion, he tossed it in the face of the foppish officer. The Hungarian, aghast, took up his napkin and began to brush the drink from his uniform, meanwhile sputtering to an extent verging on hysteria. The major, who had been seated immediately to his right, fumbled in assistance, meanwhile staring at Joe as though he were a madman. The cavalryman, though, was of sterner stuff. In the back of his mind, Joe was thinking, even as the other seized a bottle by its long neck and broke off the base on the edge of the table. Now, this one's from the Pink Army, an old pro, and a Ruskie sure as Zen made green apples. The major came up, kicking a chair to one side. Joe hunched his shoulders forward, took up his napkin, and with a quick double gesture wrapped it twice around his left hand, which he extended slightly. The major came in, the jagged edges of the bottle advanced much as a sword. His face was working in rage, and Joe, outwardly cool, decided in the back of his mind that he was glad he never had to serve under this one. This one gave way to rage and temper when things were pickling, and there is no room for such luxuries in a fracas. Max was yelling something from behind that didn't come through in the bedlam that had suddenly engulfed the Bexacapu. At the last moment, Joe suddenly struck out with his left leg, hooked with his foot the small table at which the 3 Sov officers had been sitting, and twisted quickly, throwing it to the side and immediately into the way of his enraged opponent. The other swore as his shins banged the side and was thrown slightly forward, for a moment off balance. Joe stepped forward quickly, precisely, and his right chopped down and to the side of the other's prominent jawbone. The Ruskie, if Ruskie he was, went suddenly glazed of eye. He doubled forward, originally an attempt to regain balance, continued, and fell flat on his face. Joe spun around. "Come on, Max, let's get out of here. I doubt if we're welcome." He didn't want to give the other 2 time to organize themselves and decide to attack. Defeat the 2 he and Max might be able to accomplish, but Joe wasn't at all sure where the waiters would stand in the fray, nor anyone else in the small cabaret, for that matter. Max, at the peak of excitement now, yelled, "What do you think I've been saying? Come on, follow me. There's a rear door next to the restroom." The waiters and others were converging on them. Joe Mauser didn't wait to argue. He took Max's word for it and hurried after the small worthy, going round and about the interweaving tables and chairs like an old-time broken field football player. The end of Chapter 17 of Frigid Fracas by Mack Reynolds. Recorded by Dale Grothman.